Hello and welcome back. Happy Thursday, everyone. We have some very exciting news. One of my favorite features from my favorite patch, kind of in recent times, patch 1.5.5, cultural communities, is going to be returning, and we are going to be seeing it in 1.6 before the DLC update drops, which is going to be very, very exciting. Now, I'm not sure it's going to work exactly how it did in 1.5.5, but in 1.5.5, it made it so that you could get migration while discriminating against someone, which was really, really, really nice because a lot of strategies in the game are effectively locked behind discrimination. They don't really cover the discrimination, as far as I remember, in the dev diary at all, but this was a change because it opens up the metagame for a bunch of different things. And so this is why it was really excited to me, or really exciting to me, not excited to me, that would be a strange thing, but we will be jumping into this dev diary. Hello, I'm Alex. He's Alex, one of the systems designers on Victoria 3, and I'm here to tell you a bit about what changes are going to be planned for migration in 1.6. I've also been conscripted and or volunteered one of our programmers, Conrad, down from Code Mines to give us some nitty-gritty details about what's going on. Okay. Goals for the changes. And the changes are performance-based. To start with, I'd like to clarify what the goals for these changes are, importantly what they aren't. Unlike the military rework, the goal isn't to completely change the gameplay surrounding migration. In fact, gameplay should feel somewhat similar, particularly if you don't know the exact details of how it used to work. So this sentence to me is a little... I'm really hoping it allows for discriminatory migration, but that's a huge gameplay change. So this, to me, indicates that they might not include that portion of the cultural communities mechanic. But okay, let's continue. So what is the purpose of this? Primarily, it's about performance. And in order to understand performance, we're going to pause and get in-game. Okay, so the way that the calculations in-game work is that for every single different pop type, you are going to have to do an individual calculation, and it's about different pops. So, for example, if we have Greeks, it doesn't matter how many Greeks there are, it's going to be an additional calculation here relative to Romanian. And so what happens is the more pop splintering across different religions or cultures that you have, the more calculations the game is going to need. So when you get this type of situation where look at all these different pop types, you're going to have a bad time in terms of how many calculations need to be performed. And if we take a look at the workforce and we look at the engineers, you are going to have per religion, per culture, per building, per state, fragmentation and splitting of the pops. And so what you would prefer in order to improve performance is fewer pop splintering. And so, it would be better if we just had more Malay Sunni here and less Malay Sunni over here in Montenegro, and I still have the overall same amount of migration caused, but have less and less of these smaller groups, because calculating for this like 4 stack and calculating for this 265 stack, it's the same calculation, because you're just calculating, a discrete entity, and it doesn't matter what the number next to that entity is, and this is what causes a lot of late game lag, especially once you get multiculturalism. You will cause the game to lag out a lot more because you allow a lot of migration and you allow more pop splintering. In our game in particular, we, for a brief period of time, went state atheism, which caused us to have a bunch of atheists in this game in particular, which is going to be a huge cause of, lag, because you create a whole new splintering type. You can see the lag right here as we're trying to just show off this stuff. But if we look at the charts, the fact that we have a bunch of people that are Catholic, Protestant, Sunni, Orthodox, and now also atheist ends up causing, more fragmentation of pops. Okay, so back to the dev diary. Primarily, it's about performance. We hear your concerns about mid to late game pacing, and we're constantly looking for opportunities to improve how well the game runs. Part of that is making small optimizations here and there, catching this or that value, pushing it how far we can run in parallel, and so on. Another aspect is looking at what design decisions we have made and considering if we change them so gameplay still works the same, but mechanics are more performance friendly. So what this mechanic does is it tries to end up having less pop splintering. And so maybe instead of getting Malay in both Roma and Provence, we only get the Malay in one state, and so we have less fragmenting. These changes fall into a second category. In the current version of the game, migration works by regularly splitting pops and moving the pieces all over the place, which of course often results in higher numbers of pops and worsened performance. And this is not higher nominal numbers of population, but it is a higher amount of pop splintering. And so if we have Malay if we have Malay all go to one singular state, right? If that is where all the Malay go, then they're not splintering in a bunch of other states. And so that means they're only one entity to be calculated. If the Malay go to 10 states, they're going to be 10 entities to be calculated, not including how much they're going to end up splitting as a result of having different jobs, in different religions, which of course results in a higher number of pops and worsened performance as the game goes on. In 1.6, we avoid splitting pops for migration as much as possible so that we can keep the number of pops down. And this is the number of pop entities, not the overall population. On top of performance, another reason we are doing these changes is to make the system more maintainable and easier to work in the future. The new implementation is simpler to understand when you are working with it and is a big plus for us. And incidentally should make life easier for monitors. Finally, we also wanted the opportunity to sneak some QOL and UX improvements while we were at it, which will help you towards the end of the dev diary. So, general concepts. Before I go into the details below, it's important we're on the same page for what different terms mean and how they work. I don't know why that sentence was so hard to me. Language is hard. Migration in Victoria 3, as you know, comes in two main forms. Market migrations and mass migrations. Market migrations happen exclusively within your market and largely due to economic factors in a pop's life. Mass migrations, on the other hand, are a mechanism for pops to migrate between different markets and have stronger cultural focus, because you get a mass migration according to a particular culture. How we select where people go and how many people move is highly dependent on the migration attraction the state has. This is a metric which indicates how much people want to move there due to factors like available employment, arable land, trade, and so on. When migration attraction is used, what matters is the difference in migration attraction between these two states and not the absolute value in a vacuum. It's also worth noting, so if we have one state with really high migration, it's going to siphon off from one with really low attraction, much better than it would with one with middling. It's also worth noting that migration attraction can change fairly quickly, and in particular, if the state receives a lot of migration, which is they are going to talk about why the UI has been improved a lot, in particular of this. Its migration attraction is likely to go down, which then leaves room for other states to receive migrants. If you are receiving a ton of migrants with low SOL, that's going to lower your SOL, which is going to lower your migration attraction. It's also going to fill up the unused arable land, and it's going to fill up the unused jobs. So like all the things that give you flat migration attraction modifiers are affected by receiving more pops. Finally, you will often see terms like pops, a number of pops, population, and so on, and it's good to understand the difference between them. We kind of brushed on this earlier, but a pop, also known as part of population, is a segment of the population with a specific culture, culture, religion, living in a particular state, and working in a specific building. This is important to emphasize. These are all the bases on which pops are fragmented. When you are introducing, for example, when you add atheism, if your country only had two religions and you go state atheist, now you have added 50% more splintering because atheism automatically swaps over like a quarter or 20% of your pops to state atheism. So it's going to create a bunch of lag. For example, Swedish Protestant engineers working in a tooling workshop in Stockholm. The number of pops is how many different unique pops we have in a building, state, or even the whole game. So it's the number of unique entities, not the population itself. This means that the tooling workshop above employs both Swedish and Norwegian engineers. Then the number of engineers and the number of engineer pops in that building is 2. And if those Swedish and Norwegian engineers each have different if there are going to be 2 different religions for Swedish and 2 different religions for Norwegian, then the number of pops would increase to 4. Lastly, population is how many individuals we modeled through the game through use of pops. So the pops is often like, I use it interchangeably when talking about, population, and that's key that we're not going to be doing that here. Okay. You might notice the mention of mass migration attraction. We'll go into what that means further down the dev diary. Migration attraction. Mass migration attraction. All right. So what's changed? On a very basic level, what you need to know about how the system used to work is that we pick small portions from a lot of pops all over the place and then move them around between states. In other words, migration was a system taking taking consolidated larger pops and turning them into larger numbers of smaller pops, which is bad for performance. I just want to reread this because I think it's important to emphasize. Migration as a system was taking consolidated larger pops. So for example, if you are accepting Han Chinese, right, and you take a state off of Qing, and they start migrating to all your states, now we are taking the consolidated Han pop, and we are distributing them among our country, which is good for, it's good for our country in terms of giving a bunch of available labor, but it's bad for performance because it's fragmenting them all over the place. So instead what we are doing now is we want to pick when we pick people to migrate, we'll try and pick as many whole pops as possible and sort them from smallest to largest and start sending them into new states. When they arrive, they will attempt to merge into local existing pops. Sometimes we will need to fragment pops for if they're too large, but we'll try to do so with more restraint. And so, for example, if we're siphoning off Han Chinese and Japanese, into our country of France, instead of the Han going everywhere, we're going to hopefully see the Han will go to 75% of the states, and then Japanese will go to 25% of the states, and in doing so, we decrease the amount of splintering than if Han went to 100% of the state and Japanese went to 100% of the states, for example. Migration destinations. Previously, pops would migrate to essentially any state that seemed attractive enough and would allow them based on your migration and citizenship laws. This led to very spread out, many-to-many migration system, which again, coupled with the pop selection system, resulted in more pop fragmentation. In the new system, we only allow pops to migrate to states with so-called cultural communities. This is the mechanic for the culture group that the pop belongs to. If there are multiple available cultural communities, we'll send migrants to all states within a certain margin of the highest migration attraction state, distributing them according to migration attraction, and if they're able to take on that many migrants. And so now the thing becomes, okay, well, we're going to need to seed places with cultures in terms of as a gameplay mechanic. We did this in 1.5.5, where we would use the greener grass campaign in order to get enough migration attraction to get this number high enough that we would pull the pops to begin with into the place so that we would have the cultural community. So in this case, we would often be trying to pull Han or, some type of Indian pop. And then once the cultural community is there, then they will receive migrants every time the migration is calculated for that thing. So they will be receiving in Michigan English pops, but if they don't have this English to begin with, then they won't be receiving them unless they have a ton, which is how it worked in 1.5.5. If you played 1.5 open beta, we did. You might recall when we tried introducing some of these changes. I do, it was crazy. And how it accompanied some interesting bugs with pops ignoring migration laws and all that. So what happened is they completely ignored migration laws, and what you would do is you would get into a customs union with Great Britain and you'd siphon off all the pops from India, all the Bengalis, even though they have the migration controls. One of the changes was the notion of cultural communities. The idea is for them to model that you are more likely to migrate to somewhere with people of your culture already live in. And this is definitely a true phenomenon. You're also more likely to have the same job. That's why you have it sounds like a stereotype, but a lot of the donut shops, for example, in Southern California, are owned and operated by Cambodians because when they come over, and they have a cultural community, what ends up happening is, they decide to do the same job as the people who they know are over here doing because they can receive assistance and, actually have a community helping them out. And so it's easier to do something like that. And you can actually read about this. There are essays about how, this is why you get people of a specific culture all kind of doing the same consumer facing job in some cases. So You can, of course, move someplace completely new, but that is not common. And so what you ended up needing in the beta is you would need a whole bunch of migration attraction, like a lot, in order to create one of these cultural communities to begin with. But then once it was there, then you could receive a stream of migrants. Do you tend to look through the in-game concepts like this often? Oh, okay, they're looking for feedback. Do you read tooltips? If you don't read tooltips and you're playing Victoria 3, you are a psychopath. Anyways, cultural communities exist everywhere. Or you already know what all the things say. That's the other thing, I suppose. Cultural communities exist everywhere. There's at least one pop of a given culture. So everywhere. Additionally, every month there is a chance for a new cultural community belonging to that culture in your market to spawn in one of your states. If no one of that culture moves to that state, the cultural community disappears after a few weeks. Okay. It is important to note that the relevant factor for performance is not the size of the population, but rather the number of pops. We already kind of emphasized this before, but it's, I think, important to understand. This means that if the migration mechanics produce more homogeneous results, we'll end up with better performing game without having to compromise the fidelity of the other aspects of the simulation: employment, pop consumption, population growth, qualifications at all. Since the concern we've heard from players previously is not at all that the simulation is too homogeneous, Since the concern we've heard from players previously is not at all that the simulation is too homogeneous, I don't care at all. The only thing I care about is if they're discriminated against or not. But other than that, I don't care like what culture any of the things are from. I wouldn't care if you consolidated into like just really aggressively consolidated pops, but results in some rather a sometimes immersion-breaking mix of pop cultures in a given state. This system lets us scale down the average number of cultures present. This system lets us scale down the average number of cultures present in each state, which is the entire point here. Okay. If you are into modding, the weights and conditions for cultural communities spawn are completely customizable through a script value, blah, 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 etc., etc. Mass migration. Mass migrations used to be more tightly coupled to market migration for 1.5. For 1.6, they work more in parallel, having their own limits and conditions. Essentially, when evaluating if we should spawn a mass migration, we go through the following steps. For every culture, go through the countries that has the culture's homeland and calculate the chance for mass migration to spawn there. This includes filtering out countries or cultures that don't fulfill the requirements for mass migrations, like having enough cultural turmoil or actually allowing the migration to happen. Pick one of the eligible countries above as the origin for the mass migration. Calculate the migration attraction for that culture to migrate to all different countries. The average migration attraction of the eligible states in the target countries. After adding a small random factor so we don't send all mass migrations to the same place, pick a country with the highest mass migration attraction. Okay. Go through the eligible states in that country and pick one with the highest migration attraction after adding a small random factor. After we span the mass migration for the selected culture and country, we picked in step 2 to the state we picked in step 5. You also might have noticed that the display migration has a weekly value instead of an annual one. This is huge. Let's get on this, because when you would get like a mass migration, it would say plus 5 million, and that 5 million is not the real number that appears there, but is rather the real number that's calculated based on the weekly value of the incoming migrants right now. But as soon as you get more pops, you decrease a whole bunch of things that are relevant for your migration attraction number, in that you get less arable land as soon as they become peasants, you get less available jobs as soon as they become employed, and if they have low SOL, they pull down the average SOL. So, the reason that migration can change pretty quickly between weeks, which used to make it confusing or even misleading when we focused on the annual value. Perfect. At this point, similar to market migration, we select pops we want to move, trying to prioritize smaller whole pops and send them on their way to their new home. We do keep track so we don't send too many people from any one state or any from any one state or to any one state, so that we neither depopulate nor overwhelm states during mass migrations. This is what happened to 1.5. You would get like California. If you had a gold rush in California and then also like oil, you would get like, you would end up with California with like 10 to 12 to 15 million pops, which was just nutters in the beta. And so that's why they pulled the mechanic in the first place, in addition to bugs involving people migrating when they shouldn't. Okay, so how did all these changes turn out? From our own tests have given us, for now, okay, not from, we're just doing a little bit dyslexic right there. For now, our own tests have given us positive results with a reduction of around 15 to 20% in the number of pops towards the end of the game. Yay! This comes from both a reduction in fragmented pops, but also in pops getting more concentrated in states which they are sent to, which leads to somewhat fewer buildings overall. I don't know how that would lead to fewer buildings, but okay. Oh, leads to somewhat fewer buildings because they're getting sent to fewer states, which means that you don't have as many states with available labor, so you don't end up, the auto queue doesn't pick up as many buildings in some states. Okay, I guess that makes sense. Okay, new shiny UX improvements. I bet you're thinking, what about UX improvements you mentioned, though? Give them to me. This is not what I'm thinking. This is never what I'm thinking. Usually I'm just thinking about gameplay mechanics only, and then I jump into game and I'm like, ooh, this is nice, after I see the UX stuff. Also, hello to all of you impatient readers who skip through the details right to the shiny screenshots and the UX changes. That's not me, I apologize. As mentioned, with migration changes, we wanted to be able to make the system a bit more accessible from a UX perspective, as the development itself showed that there was a lot of information that felt way too hard to access and understand, given how important it is. This sounds like Victoria 3 in a nutshell. For those of you who were present for 1.0, it was hard to figure out how much infrastructure a state had, which was a pretty big deal because there was also no private queue. But anyways, let's move on. No need for a history lesson. One change I personally am quite a fan of is now we clearly display if a state can actually receive a mass migration. Eligible mass migration target. That's neat. Okay. And then here's one that's not eligible. If you're wondering what the requirements are for this, they are now displayed in the updated mass migration targets. Okay. A state selected a suitable target for migration by a culture subject to considerable turmoil. A migration of target may appear when the turmoil of the culture in the country is at least 25%. Surrounding states may also see a degree of immigration to the migration target. To be eligible for mass migration, a state needs to be incorporated. I didn't even know that. That makes sense, though. Have at least 30 arable land and 70% market access. That kind of makes sense. Additionally, but the 30 arable land, I didn't know about that either, because, yeah, the auto queue building out arable land is, like, pretty bad if it bricks your ability to get mass migrations if you're trying to get the state to have a lot of people in it. I actually kind of don't like that requirement, but okay. Additionally, the state cannot already be the target of mass migration. That makes sense. I don't think I've ever seen two overlapped. Maybe I have, I'm not sure. And the country's migration and citizenship laws need to allow the migration to happen. So having open borders is going to be more important, I assume. A country is more likely to have one of its states be selected if it has a high mass migration attraction. These requirements are not new, we just haven't properly exposed them before. They're not new. I was not aware of the 30 arable land, because that's a difficult thing to... You have to, like, dig through game files to know that. I don't do that very much, and so this is something that, is really hard to learn just by, like, playing the game. that requires 30 arable land and 70% market access. Okay. It can, of course, be tedious to check states one by one if they're eligible mass migration, so we added a map mode that shows this, thank God. So we have a nice little map, which is showing which ones are eligible. While we are on the topic of map modes, we love map modes, we also add a map mode which tells you roughly which country is most likely to receive mass migration. New World, of course, is going to have the lion's share of that. Looks like... Okay, it's doing by country, the green by country. This map mode also includes a concept for mass migration attractions, so it's calculating which country. And so the fact that it's looking at a which country basis and then looking on a which state basis, I think leads to fewer calculations as well, which should help with performance. Something I felt has been missing from the game for a long time is a map mode where it shows where people are actually moving rather than where there's high migration attraction. We have that now. Big nice. People are leaving Idaho. Ouch. And they're going to Missouri. Interesting. Finally, we also reworked the old migration attraction map mode so it only shows states within your market, which I think is nice. Rather than the whole world, this should be better to communicate the difference between market and mass migrations as we show where your people from your market are likely to move to and from. So this is nice. You can see that this appears to be the UK's market because there's the UK up there and there's, you know, the East India Company Canada down here, you know, classic UK stuff. But they have laws that don't allow discriminatory migration in India. And if the laws are not getting overwritten, well, so here's the thing: is I'm curious to see they haven't touched on this discriminatory migration at all. And this was one of my favorite parts. And by the sound of reading through all of this, the fact that they've not touched on it at all makes me think that you'll still have to go multiculturalism and total separation every single game, which is a bit of a bummer. I was hoping that we would get some discriminatory migration, but okay. For the modders out there, you will we also renamed and removed a bunch of defines. This is not something that I know what it all means. And then we have next time. That's it for today. Happy Thursday. Hope you enjoyed reading this about how we're working with migration, and hope you're looking forward to playing with these new map modes and improvements in 1.6 with a free update in 1.6 on March 6th. So now we know the date. It's going to happen on March 6th. If you can't wait until then, the next Dev Diary, 2 weeks from now, we'll have the full changelog for 1.6, which will include all the other things we've done outside of migration and UX improvements. See you then. So I'm really hoping that they allow for discriminatory migration. If you have a law that allows for discriminated people to migrate to your country, but we will see. If they do this, that'll be absolutely fantastic because it'll open up a lot of new things where you can go, ethno-state and still get more pops, because the pops are so important. The turmoil and the radicalism is less important, although it's still relevant. I still think like multiculturalism and total separation would be better just so you don't discriminate, but it'll be fun to experiment if that's not the case. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this rundown of Dev Diary 105. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. It does help out, and other than that, have a good day.